Hi there, welcome to everyone to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So we're launching a new series today. This one will run concurrently from Monday through Saturday this week coming. First episode will be today, of course, and that episode, this mini-series is basically simply entitled Yes and Genesis. So the premise of this series is very simple. Yes and Genesis are two of the biggest prog bands in history and are often talked about in the same breath. Many people talk about them. They talk about one, they talk about the other. They often compare them. They often cite them as being great rock bands. And the reason I chose the series is a few months ago, Ben suggested I do something on the two of them together. And so I've decided to do this particular thing. So what I've done for the series is I've chosen 6 different categories. And we will do one of those categories per episode, in which you are going to have an album from each band. And I'll discuss some of the similarities and some of the questions that people may want to know about these particular albums and why these two albums are similar that way. So the first question of the day is when their sound became their sound. So what does that mean? Well, when did Genesis sound coalesce into that sound that is recognizable as Genesis throughout most of their early progressive rock sound? Of course, later they became more of a pop band, but initially they were a prog band. When did that sound develop? And then the other, and the same with Yes. When did that Yes album, what Yes album came out? No pun intended. That Yes developed that sound that went forward and became the Yes sound. So the two albums I've chosen for today for that, to answer that question, when did that sound become their sound, are these two albums, Genesis Trespass and the Yes album by Yes. This is Genesis' second album, and this is Yes's third album. So both these bands had fairly, I would say, parallel kind of moves up the ladder. They both had very similar kind of curves. Maybe Yes might have been a little ahead here, and Genesis might have been a little ahead there, but eventually they all basically had that same kind of curve. And that's why I'm able to do like a 6-album comparison between 6 different albums that all had a similar thing. So the first one, of course, this one, talking about these two albums. So the first thing about these two albums is they didn't do exceptionally well commercially. This one maybe have done a little bit better, but the track "The Knife" on here was kind of their big one at that point in time. That was the one that was really the one that kind of started it for Genesis as being one of their big songs. With Yes, they had "I've Seen All Good People," which became kind of their big track of that time period. So they both kind of had some commercial success. They had to have had some commercial success, otherwise, quite possibly they wouldn't have lasted as long as they did. Okay, what made these albums what it was and in this category? Okay, so this one, because Genesis, what brought why is this album the one I chose for this category? Basically what it is. So the reason I chose this album for the category, because the first Genesis album doesn't really sound like the Genesis moving forward. This one kind of starts that. Then you get Nursery Crime, Foxtrot, Selling Them by the Pound. All of those albums fall within the same kind of range as this one, a little bit more advanced each way as we went along. So Genesis got better as it went along. They progressed, which is why they're a progressive rock band, right? So this album definitely started that. A little bit more pastoral than what went forward. but nevertheless, the sound was already coalescing here. They didn't have their full classic members of the band at this point, but they were already making that move forward. Similarly, with Yes, they on their third album, they start what would become more recognizable as the Yes sound. The first two albums had elements of that in it, especially the second album had a little bit of elements of that, but this one kind of moved it much further along. It had a much stronger kind of progressive sound to it. The instrumentation was better. And, they replaced one of the original members with Steve Howe. So this band was beginning to coalesce with the group members into the band that they would become known for. And the classic lineup of the band. So that's why both of these I chose to be the first album in this category. The outstanding tracks. So obviously the outstanding track on this one is pretty obviously The Knife. Not that the other stuff isn't good. There's some good stuff on this album, but The Knife is kind of the beginning. It's actually kind of a heavy song for Genesis, especially in this period of time and for this album. Very heavy. The outstanding track in here isn't as obvious, but obviously I've Seen All Good People is the track that made some commercial success, but I don't think it's necessarily the outstanding track. For me, the outstanding track is either Starship Troopers or Yours Is No Disgrace, depending on where you're coming from. Initially, I think Starship Troopers would have been viewed as the outstanding track on this album because it was so good and everybody loved it. But later, Yours Is No Disgrace has become kind of that cult favorish song that so many people from Yes, who are Yes fans, go back to because it's such a good track, and all that coming from Bonanza too. So for my ranking, I rank this album being in the top. I think I rank this as my second favorite Yes album. That sounds about right to me. I think it's definitely a top 2 album for Yes in their history, whereas this is not as high up the ladder. Still a masterpiece album. They're both masterpiece albums, but this one maybe ranks 6th. Although it's gaining on Wind and Wuthering, which is like number 5, I think, or Tornado, which is number 5. So I think this album may end up in the top 5 eventually, but that's where they rank with me. The overall sound, this is more pastoral. Has more of a pastoral. It's quieter. It's more thought-provoking, I think. Other than The Knife, the rest of the album is a little bit more pastoral in its progressive nature, where this one's a little bit more bombastic. Keyboards aren't really 100% developed on this, but for the most part, the guitar, the bass, the riffs, the 3 big songs, Starship Trooper, I've Seen All Good People, Yours Are No Disgrace, and even Perpetual Change to some extent, are more developed, kind of a little bit more, I would say, not as poppy, not heavy by any stretch, but very proggy. The artwork on this cover is a photo of a bunch of guys with a head. I don't get it. This one's much better. This is kind of the beginning of that era when they started doing these kind of photos. This one has much more of a classical, almost mythical feel to it. So very good. And then, of course, the members. Okay, so the members on this album, this is still completely undeveloped to their classic members. They have some of their classic members, Peter Gabriel on vocals, Mike Rutherford on bass, and I do believe he plays some guitar on here as well, and Tony Banks on all the keyboard instruments. So those are 3 of their classic members. And then in addition to that, you have John Mayhew, I think that's how you pronounce it, on drums and percussion. Not that great of a drummer, but not terrible either. He's a good drummer, but not up to the standard that Phil Collins would set later. And then, of course, Anthony Phillips, who I do like. He's more of a guitarist guitar. Like he plays that acoustic stuff a lot, but he does have more of an electric sound to his music, more than Steve Hackett did, who I have known. To me, Steve Hackett is a much more refined talent and able to play things that I don't think are within Anthony's range. So at this point in time, you've got 3 of the classic members and then 2 guys who just kind of filled it in a bit. It's interesting how when they did the Seconds Out album, the live one a few years later, with Steve Hackett, there was a much bigger and bombasticer sound than the songs were on here. This one, so this features originals John Anderson, Chris Squire, Bill Bruford, and Tony Kaye, all on this album. John Anderson on vocals, Chris Squire on bass and backing vocals, Bill Bruford on drums and percussion, and Tony Kaye on keyboards and synthesizers. But they've removed Peter Banks, who was on the first 2 albums, and replaced him with Steve Howe. Peter Banks was a good guitar player. Steve Howe is a great guitar player, and I think he added quite a bit more to this album. His guitar abilities are all over this album. The electric and the acoustic abilities quite prominent, and really kind of begun to stage where they were going to go with this album. And so for me, these are 2 good albums to start off the series with. Both kind of beginning that style that both bands would become known for as they moved forward, and creating some stuff that from quite literally, I think these are 2 of the top, if not the 2 top prog bands, considered by a lot of people to be the top 2 prog bands in history. Now, some people will argue Rush or Pink Floyd or Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I'm not saying that anybody's wrong. I just felt that these 2 bands fit well together because they have a lot of similarities. So there you have it. That's episode 1 of the mini-series we're doing, which is featuring both Yes and Genesis. So I hope you've enjoyed this initial episode. If you have, please hit the like and subscribe. Any comments about either of the bands or how you see this, you can put in the comment section below. It's all open for discussion. I'm hoping that I will learn something too about both of these bands, because these are 2 bands that are basically my second and third favorite bands, and I love both of them, oftentimes pretty close to equally now. So I hope like I said, I hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss episode 2, which will come out. This will come out tomorrow morning. Episode 2 will come out on Tuesday, and that topic will be a different one. Actually, I don't have the topics in front of me, but there's 5 more to go. I hope you will enjoy this, and we will see you on Monday morning with this and Tuesday morning with the second episode. So have yourself a great day, and talk to you later. Goodbye.